It's Wednesday, February 10th. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel, and today, as promised, we're going to do a summary review of the 4-hour-long marathon NTSB session yesterday, where the NTSB determined the probable cause of the tragic loss of the Calabasas helicopter crash that took the life of NBA star Kobe Bryant, friends, and family. In this review, we're going to review the probable cause of this accident according to the NTSB. We'll review the 13 findings that the NTSB came up with, as well as the 4 recommendations. We'll also discuss this in layman's terms, hopefully so that everybody can understand. I want to thank everybody that watched the briefing yesterday. It was kind of a historic first for the Blanco Lirio channel to broadcast live the actual briefing where the NTSB makes these final determinations. It was a great view inside of how the sausage is made, so to speak, of how the NTSB finalizes their probable cause and findings. Remember, the NTSB is an advisory branch of the government only. They do not have the ability to make regulations or enforce regulations. The NTSB is there to advise the FAA of what recommendations they come up with from these accidents that the FAA should consider implementing. They also can take this information to legislatures, which can then add pressure to the FAA to make changes to aviation safety. As such, the NTSB is made up currently of 5 board members that are political appointees, and then dozens of accident investigators and experts and outside help that help the NTSB board come up with their final determinations. First up, the probable cause, no surprise, drum roll, spatial disorientation. The NTSB determines that the probable cause of this accident was the pilot's decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions, clouds, which resulted in the pilot's spatial disorientation and loss of control. Contributing to the accident was the pilot's likely self-induced pressure and the pilot's plan continuation bias, which adversely affected his decision-making, and Island Express Helicopter's inadequate review and oversight of its safety management processes. So what does that mean in layman's terms? The pilot took it upon himself to take this flight under special VFR conditions, perfectly legal special VFR conditions, with an overcast ceiling of about 1,100 feet above the ground, and proceeded along the freeway courses towards his destination, until which point that the terrain rose up into the overcast, and the pilot, flying at nearly 140 knots, elected to continue and do an emergency IFR escape, if you will, even though he didn't declare an emergency, and attempted to climb up through the overcast layer where the tops were at about 2,400 feet. And in the process of climbing up through this overcast, within just 100 feet of breaking out, spatial disorientation took over, and the pilot, hand-flying the helicopter, lost control of the helicopter, and a classic spatial disorientation, leans turn to the left, ever-increasing descending spiral turn, impacting the terrain. But first I want to clear up some common misconceptions before we go on. This type of accident has been happening for years. It's one of the top 5 killers in general aviation and in helicopter operations. And regarding helicopters specifically, a lot of folks say, why couldn't he just stop? A helicopter can hover. Why can't you just hover out of that situation? This is a foot stomper. You cannot hover a helicopter without visual reference. In other words, you cannot hover a helicopter in the clouds. Why? Because the instruments, if you're going to transition to instruments, you have to be in forward flight. The instruments are only capable of pitch, roll, and yaw. They are not capable of measuring drift, left or right, or if you're drifting backwards. If you attempt to hover without visual reference, you will lose control of the aircraft. It's hard enough to hover a helicopter with visual reference, virtually impossible without visual reference. Only the most sophisticated search and air rescue advanced helicopters have the capability to hover in IMC conditions. This helicopter in this crash did have an autopilot, a perfectly capable and functioning autopilot, but this autopilot has a 50-knot limitation. Even the autopilot cannot hover the aircraft itself. It needs to be moving forward at least 50 knots. And one of the sad facts about this accident is, had the pilot been proficient enough in his autopilot operations, he could have easily gotten the autopilot on, and that would have assisted him in getting up through the marine layer without getting the leans, or at least it would have had control of the aircraft, and it would have allowed him to overcome his spatial illusion, disorientation. Well, how come you can't tell which way's up if you're in the clouds? If you're on the ground here, you close your eyes, you still have gravity working straight down below you. You can tell which way's up, and you can still move around okay. You lift yourself up off of the ground and into a moving aircraft, the situation changes completely. Why can't you just put a plumb bob on a string and determine which way is up in an aircraft? Because in an aircraft or a helicopter that's flying forward, same as an airplane, you have that centripetal force, and so that gravity vector is operating straight through the seat of your pants. So when you're in a turn, your inner ear vestibular system is telling you that you are in straight and level flight. That's why you have to trust your instruments. You have to quickly transition and be current and proficient at its instrument flying when you enter IMC conditions. Now you can train for this on the ground using vision limiting devices, often called foggles or a hood. But what's the old saying? A peek is worth 1,000 looks. A peek looking outside is worth 1,000 cross checks. And even though you're practicing under the hood and you're starting to feel that spatial disorientation take place, if you just take one little peek outside of that hood and see the horizon, your vestibular system is instantly rejiggered and you know which way is up. But when you're in the clouds, you don't have that opportunity to cheat. You have to trust and fly your instruments, and you have to be proficient at it. So what's the general rule of thumb when you're scud running in special VFR conditions? You always got to leave yourself a way out. You always got to have a plan B. And that includes slowing the aircraft down. Scooting along at 140 knots is an easy way to get yourself into inadvertent IMC. The best thing to do is to slow the aircraft down. If you got plan B, you need to make that decision to stop the flight in a helicopter before you enter the clouds. While you still have visual reference in a helicopter, that's why they're allowed to fly in special VFR low visibility conditions, you can slow down, stop, hover the aircraft, and land it virtually anywhere there's enough room. But you have to be in visual conditions. Once you're in IMC, you have to do an emergency escape. Now let's review the 13 findings from the NTSB. Number 1, none of the following safety issues were identified for the accident flight: pilot qualification deficiencies or impairment, helicopter malfunction or failure, or pressure on the pilot from Island Express helicopters or the charter broker or the client to complete the flight. So in other words, there was nothing wrong with the aircraft, the fuel load was fine, and there was no pressure, external pressure put on the pilot to complete the flight. The pressure that the pilot felt, we'll talk about later in human factors, was self-induced. One of the sad facts that came out of the investigation was that the pilot and Kobe had become friends over this time period, and Kobe developed this trust with this pilot, and it's believed that the pilot didn't want to let his friend down. And also the pilot knows that, and he's the chief pilot of this operation, he knows that if he doesn't get his client to his destination, somebody else will in this very competitive business in the LA basin. Number 2, although the air traffic controller's failure to report the loss of radar contact and radio communication with the accident flight was inconsistent with air traffic control procedures, this deficiency did not contribute to the accident or affect its survivability. ATC had little or nothing to do with this accident. This is all on the PIC, the pilot in command. ATC cannot guide you through this weather. They can help you, they can assist you, and this ATC controller was, but once you descend below radar contact, there is little or nothing ATC can do. Robert Sumwalt made a good point of this in his briefing, and he's basically saying stop the frivolous lawsuits against ATC in this accident. There are some lawsuits out there that are just absolutely frivolous on this point. Number 3, had the pilot completed an updated flight risk analysis form for the accident flight that considered the weather information available at the time the flight departed, and I think that's en route weather, the flight would have remained within the company's low risk category, but would have required the pilot to seek input from the director of operations to provide an alternative plan. So they have a risk assessment form available to them. They used the risk assessment form. Even with all the marine layer in there, it still came up low, but it came up low enough to where it did not require anybody else to oversee this risk assessment. The whole idea of a risk assessment is that the higher the risk, the higher level of management, you need to get approval for this flight. And according to this risk assessment, it would have required an alternative flight plan. What's your plan B? Where are you going to divert to? What are you going to do if in the event the weather turns south? Slang for the weather going bad. Number 4, at the time the pilot took action to initiate a climb, the helicopter had already begun penetrating clouds. Pilot lost visual reference to the horizon and the ground. The loss of outside visual references was possibly intermittent at first, but likely complete by the time the flight began to enter the left turn that diverged from its route over US 101. Spatial disorientation. Number 5, the pilot's poor decision to fly at an excessive airspeed, I think it was 140 knots, and that was verified. There's a little camera clip, a traffic camera clip of the helicopter zipping overhead the freeway at a high rate of speed under low clouds. Start that over. Number 5, the pilot's poor decision to fly at an excessive airspeed for the weather conditions was inconsistent with his adverse weather avoidance training, slow down, and reduced the time available for him to choose an alternative course of action to avoid entering IMC conditions. So if you're flying slower, you can turn a much tighter radius, you have a much more maneuverability at a slower speed, you have more time to make a decision, and in the case of the helicopter, if you remain visual, you can literally come to a stop as long as you're in visual conditions. Number 6, the pilot experienced spatial disorientation while climbing the helicopter in instrument meteorological conditions in the clouds, which led to his loss of helicopter control and the resulting collision with the terrain. Number 7, the pilot's decision to continue the flight into deteriorating weather conditions was likely influenced by his self-induced pressure to fulfill the client's travel needs. His lack of an alternative plan and his plan continuation bias, get there-itis, which strengthened as the flight neared the destination. I'm almost there. We're just going to cut through here, and we're going to get there. Number 8, Island Express Helicopter Inc.'s lack of a documented policy and safety assurance evaluations to ensure that its pilots were consistently and correctly completing the flight risk analysis forms hindered the effectiveness of the form as a risk management tool. Are these risk management tools just becoming eyewash? This pertains to military operations as well as civilian operations. Is it something you just fill out as a formality and you don't really pay attention to what that risk analysis is telling you about the actual risk on this particular flight? Number 9, a fully implemented mandatory safety management system could enhance Island Express helicopters' ability to manage risk. They had a safety management system in place. It was not required by the FAA, but it was an incomplete safety management system and it did not have FAA oversight. Number 10, this is a big one. This is where we're making a difference out here. Dan Grader. The use of appropriate simulation devices in scenario-based helicopter pilot training has the potential to improve pilots' abilities to accurately assess weather and make appropriate weather-related decisions. Scenario-based training, that's AQP, what we call Advanced Qualification Program in the airlines, something we've been doing for years in the airlines. In the airline industry, Part 121 world, we recognize that it's not just enough to pass a check ride every year. It's the same old check ride, just meeting the same minimum standards. You get that check ride done, you get it out of the way, and then you spend the majority of the remaining training period on very valuable scenario-based training scenarios. And you get your training staff every 6 months or a year or so. They use actual events that are happening out there in the real world, get it distilled down and approved by the FAA into a training scenario, and run all your pilots through this training scenario and put yourself in the seat of some of these recent accidents and incidents and learn from their mistakes. This needs to be spread throughout the Part 135 world as well as Part 121 and general aviation as well. And that's a big part of general aviation, hangar flying, and channels like this where we're discussing accidents all the time, but to actually get out there and practice these scenarios. 11. Objective research to evaluate spatial disorientation simulation technologies may help determine which applications are most effective for training pilots to recognize the onset of spatial disorientation and successfully mitigate it. You really can't get the full effect of spatial disorientation until you are in the cockpit of the aircraft, in the clouds. You can practice flying instruments on a simulator, and that simulator may have some limited motion, but it's still attached to the ground. Until you get in the air and get complete IMC conditions, can you really get the full effect of spatial disorientation. 12. A flight data monitoring program which can enable an operator to identify and mitigate factors that may influence deviations from established norms and procedures can be partially beneficial for operators like Island Express helicopters that conduct single pilot operations and have little opportunity to directly observe their pilots in the operational environment. Single pilot, you don't have a co-pilot backing you up. You got an autopilot hopefully to back you up if you're proficient and current in the use of it. But what they're talking about here is a FOQA type system that is widely used throughout the airline industry. In the airline industry, every move I make on board that airliner is recorded. And if I make one move that's out of limitations or out of the norm of the operational procedures, that is recorded and flagged by a so-called gatekeeper who monitors this data, and I can expect a phone call and have a discussion with that gatekeeper as to what went wrong and why did I exceed that limit or why did I not do that by the procedure, by the book. This is the type of program they're talking about implementing here in this operation. This program also goes hand in hand with your safety management system to complete the feedback loop to make sure that everybody is learning from these exceedances. And number 13, a crash-resistant flight recorder system that records parametric data and cockpit audio and images with a view of the cockpit environment to include as much of the outside view as possible could have provided valuable information about the visual cues associated with the adverse weather and the pilot's focus of attention in the cockpit following the flight's entry into the clouds, IMC conditions. This is going to get huge blowback, but this is an important thing. We could have had this accident figured out almost immediately had we had this sort of data capability on board the aircraft. But it's going to be a lot of personal privacy rights, First Amendment rights, that are going to be protested when it comes to getting video cameras in the cockpit. But a lot of us already fly around with GoPros in the cockpit, and we're reviewing our every move. And if we had that kind of technology available, we could get to the bottom of these accidents so quickly and with such a greater degree of certainty. Now let's move on to the 4 recommendations the NTSB has. Some of these will sound familiar. Require the use of appropriate simulation devices during initial and recurrent pilot training, Part 135 helicopter operations. Foot stomper, Dan Grader. to provide scenario-based training that addresses the decision-making, skills, and procedures needed to recognize and respond to changing weather conditions in flight, identify and apply mitigation strategies for avoiding adverse weather, practice the transition to the use of flight instruments to reduce the risk of spatial disorientation, and maintain awareness of a variety of influences that can adversely affect pilot decision-making. Get out there and practice it. Because flying on instruments is a very perishable skill. And one of the sad facts that came out of this case is even though this pilot was a CFII, that means he's in an instrument instructor helicopter, according to his logbooks, it sounded or looked like this pilot only had 70 hours total time in instrument meteorological conditions, of which 68 of those hours were in the simulator. And that's out of the thousands of hours of flying time that this pilot had. This pilot was basically a VFR pilot and not current and qualified in instrument flying, nor was he required to be. Number 2, convene a multidisciplinary panel of aircraft performance, human factors, and aircraft operations specialists to evaluate spatial disorientation simulation technologies to determine which applications are most effective for training pilots to recognize the onset of spatial disorientation and successfully mitigate it, and make public a report on the committee's findings. So there's an opportunity out there for some of you tech guys to develop a spatial disorientation training program. NTSB recommendations to Island Express helicopters. 3. Participate in the Federal Aviation Administration Safety Management System Voluntary Program. 4. Install flight data recording devices capable of recording a flight data monitoring program on each helicopter in your fleet, and establish a flight data monitoring program, FOQA is what we call it in the airlines, that reviews all available data sources to identify deviations from established norms and procedures as well as other potential safety issues. Again, when you know that you're being monitored all the time, you operate differently than when you are in a situation where you think you can get away with it because nobody's watching. So those were some of the new recommendations the NTSB had, and here's some of the same old recommendations that they've been trying to get implemented year after year, and you're going to see this on the NTSB's most wanted list. To the FAA, after the action and safety recommendations A16-34 is completed, require all Part 135 operators to establish a structured flight data monitoring program that reviews all available data sources to identify deviations from established norms and procedures and other potential safety issues. Require also Part 135 operators to establish safety management programs. So make it a requirement, not just voluntary, but a FAA requirement. That'll ensure that the FAA is in the feedback loop and reviewing the safety management system of these operators. Here's a recommendation to the wider helicopter industry. Provide on your existing turbine-powered helicopters that are not equipped with a flight data recorder or a cockpit voice recorder a means to install a crash-resistant flight recorder system that records cockpit audio and images from the view of the cockpit environment. Another sad fact that came out of this accident was that this helicopter was equipped with a CVR, a cockpit voice recorder, but that CVR was apparently removed at some point in the helicopter's history when it transferred ownership. So there was no CVR on board during this crash. And the CVR in and of itself, when you're a single pilot operation, there's nobody to talk to. You don't get any interaction between the pilots, but what the CVR also provides critical data of is the sounds of the equipment, and you can get a lot of data for your performance study from listening to the sounds of the equipment from the cockpit voice recorder. And you can also, without having a video of the cockpit, you can also deduce different sounds of different pilot functions, flipping switches and that sort of thing, and help determine what the pilot was doing at the time of the accident. And finally, yet another plea to the FAA to install for all Part 135 operators to install flight data recording devices capable of supporting a flight data monitoring program. That's been classified by the NTSB as open discussion with the FAA and unacceptable response. Again, remember, the NTSB can only make recommendations. It's up to the FAA to make regulations. And require all existing turbine-powered, non-experimental, non-restricted category aircraft that are not equipped with a flight data recorder or cockpit voice recorder and are operating under Part 91, 121, or 135 to be retrofitted with a crash-resistant flight recorder system. The crash-resistant flight recorder system should record cockpit audio and images with a view of the cockpit environment to include as much as possible of the outside view, and parametric data per aircraft and systems installation. Now a lot of this information is already becoming available with the latest generation of avionics. You can get a card and download the data of your flight, or even, your cell phone has more technology, is more technically capable than many of these data recorders at this time. The problem is getting them FAA approved to install in your aircraft permanently. But there's a great opportunity, again, for you tech guys out there to develop systems, or to develop standalone systems or even portable systems, crash resistant, that can record flight data. This is going to be an ongoing, you're going to see this on the NTSB Most Wanted list. This is going to be an ongoing theme to collect and gather more data on each flight to help resolve what happened in these accidents. So that's the probable cause, findings, and recommendation from yesterday's 4-hour NTSB presentation on the loss of the Calabasas helicopter crash from last year. This is an ongoing problem. You're going to see this again and again. We've got to slowly work our way through this process, and with your help, try to bring these numbers down. Thanks so much for your support here on YouTube. Your subscription on YouTube helps get this word out there, and especially to the folks on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.